every time I watch this movie, and I've come back to this franchise quite often. I think I've gone through. I only watch these movies probably as a whole. Every time, every 7-8 years or so. I've had this notion before where I watch it where I want to find the genius in this movie. Like it's an underappreciated masterpiece, or at least a decent movie underneath all this that might just only live in the shadow of better films in the franchise. And after I watch it, I realize no, it is what it is. It's an extremely flawed movie. George Miller has absolutely miscalculated where to take the story, and it's a huge misstep, and that's okay. It's not as bad as some people say it is, but it's certainly not a great film, maybe even a good film. There are several things that I just don't think. There are some things actually that do work well here. I think Mel Gibson is at his best in the entire franchise in this movie. In The Road Warrior, it's a minimalist approach with little dialogue, and I think he's perfect in that for the Max character. He's on his personal journey. But in this film, which I believe is supposed to take 15 years later, Gibson, I think, is 29 years old in this. I mean, he's a gorgeous man, but his face looks like he's aged like 6 years from in the first film also. But Gibson emotes so much more in this film, and his performance, I think, is outstanding in this. And I can really see why Hollywood really came knocking after this and why he landed Lethal Weapon after this movie, because he is incredible in this movie. I love the overall journey that Max takes in this movie. I think the key also to enjoying this movie is to try to frame it properly. This is not an action movie to me. If I frame this in the context of an almost Spielbergian adventure film, which has those influences of things like Lord of the Flies and Peter Pan, and look at it through that lens and not as a direct sequel to one of the greatest action movies ever made, it's actually kind of palatable for me. But I think that's a tall order, even when George Miller himself, kind of reboots the franchise in 2015 and basically adds to the franchise with a 2-hour car chase movie. So I think even he realizes that this was a misstep and this isn't where the franchise should go. So this movie will always sit in my brain as an anomaly, as something that was as a misstep in the franchise. I think the combination of, as you mentioned earlier, Sam, the death of Byron Kennedy and the fact that this was an American finance production that forced us to be, I don't know if it was their decision for it to be PG-13 or if it was George Miller's decision to bring it to a wider audience. But because of that, I feels like this movie just lost its soul as a gritty, almost carnal depiction of a world gone mad. And I think that hurts it. So, hence, I think like many, I think this by an Australian mile or maybe a kilometer, I don't know, is my least favorite film in the franchise. And this is at best a 2.5 out of 5 for me.